Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. Today's SSI Orbit podcast guest is Charlie Walton, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Identity at Avast. Now, Charlie has been a thought leader in the digital ID space for many years now, having spent time across organizations such as SecureKey, IDEMIA, MasterCard, where he was a co-founder and on the steering board of both the Trust Over IP Foundation and the Good Health Pass Collaborative. And so now recently, as many of you listeners probably have heard, Avast is behind the acquisition of the company Evernym, our good friends in the self-sovereign identity space. So congratulations to Evernym and congratulations to Avast. We're quite looking forward to seeing what's going to happen there in 2022. So I hope this discussion is as helpful for you as it's been for me to think about the aspects that are needed for SSI to continue making its commercial transition in 2022. So there's a big focus in this conversation about the need for governance authorities, or orchestrators as Charlie refers to them, like a soccer coach or like a symphony orchestrator would help move things forward in their respective domain. Because we know half of the battle in decentralized identity, especially in regulated industries, is governance. And without governance entities helping to form ecosystems, set the rules, make markets, define monetization strategies, and so forth, it makes the adoption a little difficult. So someone needs to manage the bits of a trust framework that are commercial decisions. And this was quite exciting conversation with Charlie because he's put a lot of thought into this, and a lot of his experience through the Trust Over IP and forming the Good Health Pass has allowed him to further his thinking here. So I'm sure you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Charlie Walton. Enjoy. So I want to focus this discussion, Charlie, on, and this is the last episode that we're doing of the year of 2021. I think there's been a lot of momentum building over the past years, but 2021, I think things have really sped up in the self-sovereign identity space. There's a lot of focus often in various communities about kind of the needs when it comes to standards and technology to create interoperability and portability and user control of data and all of kind of the things that back the self-sovereign identity principles. I think a lot of listeners of this show are familiar with work that happens at the Trust Over IP. And for folks who don't know, you were one of the key members to getting that organization up and running in 2020. And I think a lot of the listeners know or understand kind of that dual stack model of the Trust Over IP stack, with the governance on one side and kind of the technology on the other side. The reason I'm describing this is that we do spend a lot of time focusing on the technology and standards aspects when it comes to adoption of SSI. I think there's a lot of other things that maybe need to be talked about more or focused on more to really ensure that this stuff is continuing to grow and get out. So maybe would love to just start this conversation off by just talking a little bit about how you got into the space. And if we do talk about the Trust Over IP stack and the governance being such an important factor here, would be interested in hearing some of the learnings that you've had through the Trust Over IP, but also through other initiatives like the Good Health Pass.
Yeah, great. And listen, thanks. I really appreciate the invite and chance to chat today. So indeed, I had been part of MasterCard at the time in 2020, where I was from 2017 up till earlier in the year, and we had been really working with a few folks in that community. I'd known folks from IBM and also from Evernym, and had been good friends with Drummond Reed for some time, and Drummond began to describe the stack and particularly enamored with the non-technical bit of it because it's really, really important. So at that stage had gotten involved actually quite early. At the end of the day, particularly important to get these matters better understood. I think that there's a enormous value associated with getting digital identity correct, getting it correct from kind of top to bottom. And I think the Trust Over IP group has done some phenomenal work in creating this model so people can begin getting their head around it. And I think up until the point in time, and it probably was not really even until this year, that you were able to start crystallizing and explain the notion of self-sovereign identity in a couple of words or a couple of lines, and then drill into it using that 4-layer, two-sided model. So I've just been a big proponent of it, big proponent in the end of the day that open standards for something like this are really, really key. And thinking more about this topic, particularly of decentralization this year, and have begun to see this word decentralization talked more and more and more about, and not just about identity. And you come to realize it's a really important trend and direction with all that's going on in the world these days, that where big platforms that have power and control, we're going to start to see other ways of dealing with applications and digital services. And with those sorts of decentralized applications and services of a Web 3.0 decentralized finance category, it creates all the more importance of getting decentralized identity right and doing it as in a layered, structured approach.
I would agree that, and I've been in and around the crypto and blockchain space for some years now, and the whole topic of decentralization is not new, but in that space. But I would agree with you, just on more of a macro level in society. I think people are starting to think more and more about the pitfalls of too much power in centralized places, and you're seeing that, I don't know, in conversations with government or big tech or whatever it is, but it's happening on that level as well. And then so in a space where now we're moving towards perhaps more distributed or decentralized storage of credentials or of data, half of the battle here is governing these things, right? And so I think the only way truly to put kind of notions to practice is to start going through use cases and stuff like that. And Good Health Pass was definitely one of those first ones. So would be interested to hear how Good Health Pass kind of came up off the ground, how the community was able to bring different entities or different organizations at the table, get aligned, and start thinking about governing these decentralized networks.
Yeah. So it's as things go, a little bit like sausage making, and some of that is a little bit messy, I'd say. But the story sort of goes like this: it probably the late Q3, Q4 timeframe last year, and this is whilst I was at MasterCard, we began to see the importance of setting a globally interoperable frame for almost, we'll call it fit to fly status, right? Where fit to fly might mean I'm immune, and I'm certifiably immune, or I've been vaccinated of a certain regime, or I've been tested, and it's this swirl of those signals and others, right? An exemption status for vaccination because of a condition or so on. So think about it more as fit to fly, and this whole set of reasons that could contribute to that. And we were really interested in it in the sense that it was a hot issue. The industry was dealing with point answers. If there ever was an arena in global travel where interoperability is just absolutely critical, this is a great one. So I had reached out to the Trust Over IP Foundation. I reached out, frankly, to Drummond Reed first. And we had a chat. We had invited a few others in, and then I had been knowing Dakota Gruner at ID 2020. I reached out to her, and she actually latched onto this and said, "Listen, I think I'd like to make this an important aspect of what ID 2020 is doing. It fits with the sort of things that she had done before." And lo and behold, we started a grassroots activity of trying to get some smart people together. We got the website launched in the early part of this year, and began assembling work groups. And you and others that may go to the site can see the long list of contributors who were kindly donated their time and their energy and their smarts to really put together what I think to be an absolutely brilliant template for a globally interoperable SSI system. And it's obviously in this quite narrow niche of taking a fit to fly or a COVID related credential that is bound together with identity, but is meeting the principles of selective disclosure. We solved identity binding problems and provided recommendations there, and further addressed a few issues that not necessarily new but needed to get tackled. How do we confirm that Mass General Hospital is an appropriate issuer of credentials, and Charlie's swab and jab shop is not? And to an airline or a government on the other side of the world, you may not know the difference between those two, and so that aspect of who's an appropriate issuer, right? So it's creating this frame for an appropriate issuer, and then to say, well, there is not one size fits all in terms of COVID credentials and approach. One country may say that my requirement is X, Y, and Z, and whilst you're vaccinated, I will not accept 2 vaccinations. I need a booster, or that particular vaccination manufacturer I don't accept or recognize. It's not my policy. Or that the timing of a test is of a certain duration, and those policy decisions or policy statements of a verifier, right, need to be well communicated in the system as well. So I think the group did a really, really good job at that. What I would say, and where your comment earlier about the trust over IP governance stack, and then where the Good Health Pass collaborative have gotten to, where the collaborative gotten to is publication of a blueprint, which is fantastic. But to really get teeth, to me, in an SSI anchored system, you've actually have to have what I'd almost call a commercial entity, a layer 4 trust over IP entity to take it to the next step, to take it commercial. And the Good Health Pass Collaborative was not a commercial group. It was a brain trust of people putting the thoughts down on paper. Now you say, who's going to go run that? Who operates it? Who actually holds the commercial keys? And I think that aspect of where we got could conceivably have gone to the next stage. It's not a commercial entity, so there's not commercial governance there, but it laid out the blueprint for what that could be by an operational entity.
Having kind of worked for MasterCard, MasterCard, and you correct me if I'm butchering it, but is a commercial entity that is providing, alongside other stuff, but governance to payment networks, and to distributed or transactions that are happening on the edge, but there's governance being provided by this legal entity to facilitate this and protect consumers and help merchants and make all these things work. When you think, and please correct me if that's kind of a bad take, but would this be the type of commercial entity that you would see perhaps being what's needed to really spur these decentralized networks or provide governance with a real business model behind identity networks?
So it's a really great question, and I think your first statement about MasterCard and Visa as well. These are organizations that have just done an absolutely brilliant job at setting interoperable trust networks that allow unknown party to unknown party interact with good confidence and results, and they've done that through technology specification, through collaboration with partners in the technology arena, with banks, with merchants and others. And they've done it through their operating rules. We might equate that to a group of us in the identity field as a trust framework, and that's been born and dealt with and become both localized and globally interoperable. So you don't get any better, in my opinion, on a great example than what those organizations have done. We're moving to I think a world, that was my statement right at the start. You start thinking about web 3.0, semantic web, some stuff going on in decentralized finance and applications that are that are operating in a more user-centric and then peer-to-peer like way, you end up having a different type of almost governance authority, right? And that level 4 governance authority that the trust over IP is described is kind of an example of it. So I think in form and function, not at all unlike what's been described with Visa, MasterCard in that industry. Here, I think meeting the the intention of how decentralized systems work, it's framed up, we'll say slightly differently. I do think that a trust over IP level 4 entity, a governance authority, can do several things. Needs to be setting we'll call it the commercial rules of the road. I do think the bringing in of issuers, the defining of how verifiers will communicate their policy needs, dealing with what I'd also say is the messiness that the world is not a legacy world and the world's not a decentralized world today, and that hybrid view of the world will likely remain for quite some time. So I think that organizations that can begin operating in a bridge manner and smooth that through trust framework and rules will do great. So technology independently, we're able to kind of move customers and users along. I think the other aspects of this, defining monetization rules and dealing with disputes, becoming a market maker, are actually really important at that level as well, because I think we've probably had some early views that self-sovereign will just work. And the fact of the matter is I don't believe it'll just work. I think monetary incentive and creating a market making function is actually critical. What is motivating university A or healthcare B to be creating and issuing a verifiable claim about Charlie? And they need to be organized. It's a bit like organizing the dinner party or organizing the big event. It's organizing a big network, and so the roles, the responsibilities, how liability is allocated, monetization is allocated. Those matters are all really critical to kind of get down, and it comes down to I think a governance authority to deal with it. There is no one size fits all, and you can imagine, of course, lots of governance authorities in the world, either around a country, a region, a domain, a community of interest in some respects.
I like perhaps the analogy to your Visas and MasterCards, because basically they're bringing together an ecosystem of consumers, of banks, of merchants, and others. They're, I guess, setting the standards and the rules, and so basically a bank is able to issue credit according to these standards that Visa or MasterCard or whoever they're selecting is setting for them. And there's clear benefits for consumers to do that. Just like I think when we're talking about self-sovereign identity, I think the benefits to consumers are quite easy to understand. That takes 2 minutes to understand the model to say, oh yeah, like this is a no-brainer.
Right.
And once you understand it, and over time, as you're going day by day and you're going through your life, you're like, oh my God, things could be done so much smoother with this new method, right? Does that mean then that you need kind of this governance authority with clout, or you need someone to start, I guess, maybe from a centralized perspective to do stuff like bringing an ecosystem together, creating the financial models, stuff like that? Is that the way that you think a lot of these trust ecosystems will flourish over the next years? Is that the central entity, at least as a starting point, not going full decentralized?
I do believe there's a role, and we can debate whether we put that role in the bullseye at the center of the page, or whether they're a bit off to the side, where they're really setting the stage, right? Think about them a little bit like the orchestra conductor or the soccer coach, right? They're setting the frame for the real action, for the transactions that will occur, and they're defining how it will occur. and how you deal with normal cases and how you deal with abnormal cases, really setting the stage. But at the end of the day, the orchestra conductor or the soccer coach is not in the middle of the game, right? They're helping to, or in the middle of the symphony. They're not playing the violin or the flute, right? They're kind of bringing this all together. And so too, I see the governance authority is in fact really important. They're not centralized in the context of the way we might think about a centralized control point, but they are bringing the party together. Now, in thinking about how that can work in the world, we certainly could imagine the Federal Republic of Utopia as a government to become the governance authority for a national infrastructure. So you could imagine a government playing that role if they chose to, or a region. You could imagine a region of the world choosing to operate that way with close at hand countries. We further could imagine a vertical market community of interest maker. I got to tell you, I think one of the best examples, and we had collaborated with them around the time of the Good Health Pass collaborative, was IATA, the Air Travel Association, who were really trying to bring together through an SSI network a group of airlines and airports and other airline industry tech providers and governments to an overall whole called IATA Travel Pass. And so in some sense, they were probably one of the closest to what I call a vertical market community of interest that was developed. You might imagine in a place a consortia of healthcare providers, or a consortia of banks choosing to bring together a frame or a community that might serve their vertical market interests. And then lastly, you certainly could imagine an organization that may want to bring an endpoint wallet, or what I might term a digital smart agent to bear, a technology company that might provide such a capability and provide a broad-based facilitation. So I think we're likely going to see in these years to come here, a government or other sets of groups coming together to create a community of interest, big or small.
Definitely, if we're talking about public sector or government regulated industries, perhaps it makes sense for public sector or certain governments to write the rules and kind of make the market and get things going. And I definitely think that if you look in the financial industry, for example, like these are things that kind of make sense, that it's just that they're all operating under various regulations in the legal jurisdiction that they're in. It's also probably important to note that if we're just talking about the regulated sector, like every single country or jurisdiction has their own kind of regulations and policies and legislations that they need to abide to. So you may have to have different, I guess, governance authorities for that as well. And then for the specific verticals. And I personally think we're going to see a lot more, call it the level 4 trust over IP, just specific ecosystems or trust ecosystems, whether it's like an education use case or an employment background check use case, or just the list will go on and they'll keep growing. I wonder if there's if the private sector will just start offering rulebook creation or market making services or whatever it is. You could have specific organizations that just offer that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really with you. I do think the emergence of vertical market communities of interest is a natural. You would have to say, in the fullness of time, if you really put the consumer out there and you thought about and took the step back on SSI, what do we really want? I think I know in my case, I'd love to see a digital smart agent. I define this as is kind of the smart processing associated with a wallet or a storage, something that I can go off and engage, whether I'm on a PC or a mobile or in my car or in in a deviceless public acceptance setting or public interaction point where I'm able to get to my digital smart agent through a biometric authentication. So and I think I'd probably like that tool to help me in a way that was not particular to a community of interest that I might participate in, right? Because we all know I do government things and banking things and e-commerce things and health and and on and on and on. So
Web3.
yeah. So I do think that whilst we will see these vertical market groups and whilst we will see country oriented schemes, I think it's really the very opportunistic out there to see a global player come to bear and say, I've got the blankety blank service and digital smart agent app that's got this set of promises and that is kind of plugged into networks around the world and creates a set of promises that do work. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, and I think many potential prospective ways in which that can go. The challenge I'd say with government only is that you kind of take a look at Canada to the US, right? There's a lot of cross-border there. You take a look at Europe and you got a lot of cross-border there. Other parts of the world where many of the tricky identity problems that you're dealing with are ones that just tend to cross borders. And you got the student that's going to university somewhere else, or the person that's moved from the UK to the US and is taking a job, and you're starting all over again. There's no transportability, and I'd say unfortunately there's not a great vehicle to go deal with. Let's go bring 50 countries together and kind of agree on how things are going to go. That doesn't exist. There's not been great examples. So I think this combo of government push, which we're seeing in places of the world, vertical market push, and then I'd say a really responsible ways for getting this tech out to consumers and kind of plugged into one or more great networks that exist at a country or a vertical level. I think maybe the way it begins to roll out.
The Good Health Pass was, like you said, a really good template for SSI interoperability and had a lot of really good components in there. You talked about identity proofing. I think there was a lot of advancements in the trust registries that came out of this as well. That really moved forward. I feel that often there's a lot of focus on trusting an issuer. How does the verifier trust an issuer, or how do I trust the verifier? There's perhaps, and it's a bit of I talk about this a lot on different episodes here, but just about wallets generally, because it's just, I find it just a fascinating space. And you start talking about digital smart agents, and yeah, like this is a space that you could definitely see taken off over the next few years. But it's one thing to create kind of governance for a network, or to create trust in a network. I want to create trust then in issuers or trust in verifiers, but creating trust on the edge is a whole thing on its own. And I know with some of the work that you're doing now, there's a lot of thought that's being put into authentication, perhaps continuous authentication, and then identification. And do you think there's a whole missing element of kind of building stronger trust on the device itself on the edge? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we're at a stage now where, boy, a lot of what we're thinking about doing, you rewind 10 years ago, there's just no way to approach it, right? So by way of getting more trustworthy devices, thinking particularly about mobile phones, I mean, boy, we got some wonderful capability to anchor processing down in secure elements. So I think that's an important aspect of it. We've certainly become way more accustomed, in Canada and the US and in many places in using biometrics from a device to authenticate into the device. So I think that becomes really important when you start thinking about this notion of a digital smart agent or a wallet. That that's really pretty key. And I'm rather of the opinion that if we're not designing in a way that I'm kind of showing up here and I've just got to get to my wallet where it lives, that's got to be the paradigm of the problem, because we will have it. You go think about inclusion markets, places where people don't own a device, and I still may want to interact in a public device. You gotta figure out how to deal with that one, and that dominantly comes down to a really great ways that are not tied to device ecosystems to deal with authenticating the bag of bones that's standing right here, right? So and that comes down to biometric liveness. There's some really great techniques and some very innovative companies out in the world today that are doing a very good job at biometric liveness detection, dealing with attack vectors. It's a tough problem, and the bad guys are going to continue to fight against those that are trying to provide these answers. There's technology there that's not been bolted into popular consumer devices yet. So I think that part of this market is really important to continue to get right and continue to work towards.
It's tough sometimes to think about where, like in this decentralized model where it's now an ecosystem, where do I fit into the ecosystem? And if I'm a technology provider, or if I'm I don't know, a recipient of data, or if I'm a potential issuer or a data company, where do I fit in, and how does my model change with that? Is it more kind of the inability of companies to kind of switch their business models to fit inside of this, or they're not seeing it? I'd be curious of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's point stuff. I don't think it's point tech. That's number one, and I don't think it's for lack of standards. There's been a lot of really good work done, and I think we've proven out propositions in point studies. The needs clearly out there for decentralization in identity this way. There's no question that the stakes here are increasing. We're in spite of all the great efforts that have occurred in the community, card not present fraud is still growing. That's synthetic identity fraud and friendly fraud. We're seeing ID theft continuing to grow. So there's a need, there's a way of solving it. What's the missing ingredient, right? It's the hardest one. It's really the orchestration, the collaboration of bringing together the whole thing. And so I come back to, very frankly, it's the level 4 governance authority that's made something commercially real, right? I think in the past I've probably referred to this as commercial SSI. We've gotten kind of the tech and the theory and the approach and the standards down. Now you say, okay, let's go make it a reality. We're going to go invent the blue service, and the blue service is going to do these sorts of things, and it's going to go make a market and create a way to monetize participants and deal with it all. A place that a bank or a gig economy company or a crypto wallet firm or a startup that wants to do new ways of dealing with health data, that can just go plug in and use this. But that doesn't exist. That's the problem here, right? You want to go do that, you got to go roll your own. You got to go out to the best, biometric liveness company. You got to go find an SSI toolkit company. You got to find an integrator to go deal with it. You're kind of rolling your own. So I think we're lacking the orchestrated whole. You go back to, pick any point along the history of the bank card industry, and you've got tech and technique and risk management and rules and all of that. But imagine a global credit card system working, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, without a MasterCard or Visa. Doesn't work. Just doesn't work, right? There's no way to get there. So I think the big hurdle here are the emergence of commercial SSI governance authorities.
Again, having spent so much time in the Web3 or blockchain space, and then transitioning into SSI, there's a lot of similarities, because you're trying to build decentralized governance for ecosystems. And I feel that's one of the biggest, I guess, inhibitors to adoption of a lot of, you could call it enterprise blockchain, or people trying to make it commercially viable outside of a Web3 space. And we could talk about that. And there's some stuff that's debatable there. But one of the hardest things has been just creating consortium governance. And one of the things I had noticed a lot in that space, which is same thing in the SSI space, is that people are just trying to create new ecosystems for stuff. Like I want to disrupt the education space, and I want to create this new thing, but it exists. Like that ecosystem exists, and it's not like you're trying to build something from scratch. It's just perhaps how do you allow an existing ecosystem to digitally transform in the direction that you're trying to allow it to digitally transform in. And then it becomes interesting then to think about, well, if I'm a subject matter expert on a specific industry, how do I start targeting who should be the orchestrator, who should be orchestrating the symphony? Because and then how to entice them, like who are these organizations, and how to entice them with a business model for doing it is maybe a tough thing to think about.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think that, again, the good work that I've seen done within Trust Over IP, the good work done within the Good Health Pass Collaborative, is that at least it's starting to write down what you'd have to do, the attributes to it. It's making it a little bit more tangible what the blueprint would be to operate in that way. Ultimately, I think it does come down to, again, a sponsor. The government's going to choose to do that for the Federal Republic of Utopia, or this association or this group or this consortia are going to get together for the blankety blank industry, or there's going to be a proactive, let's call it a proactive tech company that just says, okay, I'm going to go create this in a horizontal way for the world, and let verticals kind of plug in and interconnect to other networks that start to emerge out there. So I think the really optimistic thing here I see is that we've seen more examples come to bear over, even just this past 18 months. I think we would both agree this has been a great 18 months for this movement, and I'm certainly seeing more of a push in decentralization as a broader theme, just to deal with some of the stuff that we're seeing in the world today around dominance of big tech, of creating different ways of engaging. All the more reason for decentralized identity to come to bear, really soon, really quickly. So I think we're going to see a really lively next 18 months in this area.
I definitely think next year is going to be a big year for pilot projects in the area. I think we've already seen a bunch of them, but I don't know when true scale happens, but there's definitely interest there. And a lot of at least in the regulated sector, a lot of the movement from governments in the space has kind of spurred some excitement in health and finance and in some of these regulated industries. The other thing I think about often too is, like you mentioned, the Good Health Pass, and when that blueprint had come out, I thought about it a bunch, because in the title of the blueprint is the word interoperability. And it's such a key component, and it's focused on so much from a technical perspective, from a governance perspective, from stuff like that. It's a difficult one as well. And I've always wondered sometimes if there's too much of a premature focus on some standards or interoperability before there's any adoption. Because I mean, if I have two networks that have a lot of adoption, if there's a commercial reason for them to talk to each other, they will talk to each other.
Yeah.
Do you feel like sometimes maybe that needs to just take a side seat to get things going?
I'm actually with you. I mean, as much as I'm a big believer in this interoperable notion, and I'm thrilled to see the work that has been done in some of these groups. But the world's got to get on with this and just go solve some problems in a vertical market. And when you go look at you go pick like network problems in the past. ATMs weren't fully interoperable when they first came out. The GSM network wasn't a network. It was roaming and gluing things together, and and it was messiness under the covers. So I think the community's done a good job of saying, all right, here's a template. If you want to go do it a decent, consistent way, here's a template. But I think the big challenge now is just let's get out there. Let's start serving users and serving businesses that want to interact a little bit differently. And I'm reminded as well, and it was a conversation I had with it was a large grocer who was trying to solve problems of age verification. And I talked to them about, identity and how a digital identity or a verifiable claim accepted could be really valuable. And this business executive, and he didn't know much at all about digital identity, but remarked to me that, oh, this is a little bit like bring your own account. And I thought about that, and it's a little like wearing the placard that could be variable, right? Live human being, over 21, actually Charlie at this address, but I'm wearing the placard. And when that data set goes into that grocer, they can just transact. And he said the light bulb went off for him, and it went off for me as well. This was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And it's like, I don't need to hold as much data as I once did. Right. And so the big awareness of what this is really all about, it's beginning to reduce that toxic asset of holding lots of data about everyone I've ever interacted with for, goodness how long. And the more data you hold, the greater chance it's going to get hacked and eaten up and disclosed, and you got reputational damage and the whole bit. So I think that we will begin to see proactive organizations that just want to get on with it, for some really important reasons. Businesses to both better serve, to have better outcomes, to begin dealing more responsibly with data. I think this is what this movement is really all about. And then it's for an organization that sees value in bringing a governance together, and an organization that can bring good consumer sensitive capability to bear. I call this a digital smart agent, and I think it's more than a wallet, but it's really processing that work on my behalf, that guide me and help me through various aspects of authentication and identity and privacy management, of dealing with my digital breadcrumbs, and perhaps someday dealing with my reputational identity, which we haven't talked about, but I think is a big frontier going forward.
We've talked about reputation a bit on this podcast. We've also the centralized reputation seems to be quite effective for bottom-up use cases. If I'm example, I'm in the Web3 community and I'm trying to participate in a project, and I have to demonstrate my skill sets or my previous experience. I want to be able to demonstrate reputation there. How do you look at kind of the future of these smart agents being about building a reputation?
Well, I think it's a tough one, right? When you look at it, as a 5-star Uber driver, I'm interacting, with my app as a driver with Uber, and in that arrangement, Uber's got a lot of processing, a lot of analytics that takes everything that has gone on that I do and that others do, and how I synthesize and compare to reach conclusions or decisions and profiles. And the problem is, I got nothing. I don't have much on my side to run the processing needed on my behalf to then create something that is got integrity, that Lyft would believe in, that I didn't fudge it, that I didn't call myself a 5-star when I'm a drunk or a bad driver. And so I think the problem statement is pretty clear. I think we need more processing with integrity on the side of the user, because the building of that big analytics platform on Uber's part is with their smarts, their half of their data, but half of mine. It's an asymmetric case. I don't have anything on my side. I think this reputational identity bit is going to be about tools that do have integrity, that are not fraudulent and can work on my behalf. So it's a problem to be solved. I've not seen it solved anywhere in the industry yet. But it's a really, really interesting one. I think we go lick the basics of identity, of legal identity and some attributes. It's this reputational based identity that will become very, very valuable in the future.
And I don't think we quite know the exact use cases and the exact value, because we've never been able to combine these different things together. That's what makes me think when you're talking about kind of the bring your own ID use case that lit up that person's eyes.
Yeah.
The money, at least the way I look at it, there's a lot of commercial value. If you look in the trust triangle, we could talk about issuers getting paid to issue, but the commercial value is in the verification, because that's where kind of the business model is, which kind of begs the question that we talk about people to market make on the governance frameworks, but do we need kind of these gateway functions or proxy issuers or stuff like that that's able to go and pick data out of my LinkedIn and pick data out of my Uber and pick data out of my Airbnb? It solves a problem in the short term. It don't necessarily have to have these direct issuers. If I trust the process of extracting whatever my data from LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. I do think that it's not about a verifier doing that though, and I'm not sure you said that, but just to be clear, I think this is about me kind of getting into Facebook or getting into another platform, and certainly in some parts of the world I've got rights to be able to pull my data out and utilize that. So I think leveraging open data, open banking interfaces, this will become great ways to start providing real value, real capability for verifiers. I think there's tools that can be built, because at the end of the day, we may not convince Acme out there, who's got a data set, to go put their data in a W3C verifiable claim form and start issuing that on command and all that. That's not the way this ball is going to start. So it's messy, ugly stuff of dealing with the world as it exists, with existing APIs and open interfaces, and migrating that along for greater and greater efficiency. So, a long-winded way, I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's perhaps like the Plaids of the world that are able to go extract data that after an amount of time, you'll have the financial institution saying, "Hey, what's happening here? There's my data is being kind of used and possibly monetized against me." But then at least these types of API services allow you to extract some valuable data or something that could be bound to an individual and then placed into this new world that allows for this kind of peer-to-peer protocol communication and stuff like that. Yep. So I definitely wonder if this whole concept of proxy issuance is just one of the big missing pieces.
I think it's a really important one here in the near term, and we'll say a proxy issuer of converting data from a source into a real SSI issuer. And I think the other thing that goes along with that is to say I may need to take data from a few places and create the equivalent of a complex claim that's got real value out to a verifier. We may find that these proxy issuers are able to perform some other value added functions as well.
Well, one of the things I wanted to close on, as listeners here probably know or have heard, there's companies that already have payment solutions or wallet solutions on the mobile, like Apple, for example, or like Google. And I'll refer to Apple specifically just because that's I've followed that a little bit more, that have started offering. It seems like it's in the early stage. There's a lot of pilots still happening, but it seems like if you're Apple Wallet and you're already doing payments, just like we talked about, kind of the MasterCard and Visa's logically moving into that space, it seems like it's a logical thing for someone like Apple to do as well, to store your driver's license, to store your health card, to store your COVID result, to store whatever you want to store on there. Is that good or bad for the whole SSI space?
Let me come to the SSI space. I'd say inherently what's going on here is to say that that device that I carry around with me is now hitting the final instrument that eliminates the need to carry that leather wallet or purse. So I got to tell you, I love it. A lot of people will love it. It's the right thing to be done. Having a mobile's driver's license in an Apple Wallet doesn't get to I'd call the value of a decentralized SSI network. It may be a storage locale for one signal, but you go think about all the things that you end up doing in the identity arena, or for which high assurance transactions are called for, and it doesn't solve all of those problems. And that's the area, again, what I think the real value in an SSI system is what I call a digital smart agent. It might deal with an Apple Wallet. It might utilize and consume a mobile driver's license, but it's got lots more signals, and it's got all of my stuff, right? You go think about it, right? All we got to do is add up the relationships that we have today. Most people have 100 or 150 accounts and passwords, and a lot of those have some bearing, right? There's data of some bearing there, and you go take a look at all the bits of data that you might see in the form of verifiable credentials. And now I look at that data set. So I got 100, 150 relationships. I've got a data set that might be, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 50 different verifiable credentials. That is not going to be in the construct of an Apple Wallet, I don't believe. I think there's a very, very different thing that's necessary to help me deal with all the data, all the processing, all the audit, all the relationships, all the verifiable credentials that I've got for me. So I think there's room for kind of two things: an SSI digital smart agent and an Apple Wallet that may hold the basics, right? And maybe we get there in time with something in an Apple Wallet, but I would have to say that we're all getting to an evolving world, right? Where I interact on my PC, I interact on my Android phone, I interact in my car with Alexa, I interact in a public environment, and I think we're going to be doing lots more that's deviceless, right? And so we shouldn't be doing anything but embracing Apple and others for the work they're doing. I think it fits really, really well with all of what we're up to. I would have to say that the adoption of selective disclosure techniques and beginning to bind credentials together with identity is really important. So I'd say anybody that's putting things like COVID passes in devices need to solve that problem really well.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.